We're all familiar with the passage in 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10 that tells us that if any man would not work, neither should he eat. And yet we understand that this principle of being a productive person in society and in God's sight is one that is age old. Even in the Garden of Eden, Adam was told to work. Solomon deals with this a little bit in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. In fact, we read at verse 4, "Then I saw that all the toil and all the skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and eats to his own flesh." And yet we look at this text and we see that Solomon is showing us the negative side of man's productivity and man's work. It starts out by saying that there is such thing as toil or work, labor, and skill. And yet, while we see that this man's hands that are being described in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4, are very productive, they're doing something, they're toiling, they're laboring, they're using their skill, there's something wrong with his heart. Hands are good, heart is not so good, because he's driven by, as the text says, envy of his neighbor. He's greedy. He's playing the comparison game. He wants to be better than whoever is next to him, and he wants to have more than whoever is next to him. And so that's driving him to work. Solomon says, again, this is vanity. This is striving after the wind. The next verse that we read is the opposite of that. It's about the fool. And it says the fool folds his hands. He takes both his hands and he folds them. In other words, he's lazy and he does nothing. And notice he says that leads to self-destruction. Is there a balance? Well, you read verse 6 and it says, better is a handful, notice that's singular, better is a handful of quietness than two hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. In other words, we've got to find balance where you have one hand, yes, that's working and toiling and using its skill, but another hand that understands that that's not what life is all about, and that doesn't define a man, and that to use both hands to constantly work is striving after the wind. You see, there must be balance. There must be a balancing act that we live in our lives every day. I hope that as we look at what we do and we look at everyone around us, we find balance.